Today's topic for discussion is voluntary organizations and NGOs' response to promotion and protection of rights of women and children living with HIV/AIDS. To introduce the discussion, the challenge of human immunodeficiency virus and acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, more popularly known as HIV/AIDS, is an accepted fact. The challenge is so enormous that there is hardly any portion of human planet that has not been directly affected by HIV/AIDS. Since the detection of the first case of HIV/AIDS in 1981, the world has been struggling to confront and contain the challenge sufficiently, even if the complete eradication appears to be a distant dream. HIV/AIDS has blown up into an epidemic affecting the entire world. The epidemic has claimed more than 20 million lives, and at least 35 million people are reportedly living with HIV/AIDS all over the world. The epidemic, therefore, is exceptional in terms of its transmitting ability, associated diseases, economic impact, social ghettoization, and weakening of human resources, etc. The reality posed by HIV/AIDS has panicked both government and non-governmental organizations all over the world. By government, we mean the initiatives of the states, whereas the non-governmental, that is NGO, we mean voluntary and social networks initiatives. NGO also include a variety of organizations which are not for-profit ventures. The NGOs in its various forms include community-based organizations known as CVOs, faith-based organizations known as FVOs, and collective of the affected, that is people living with HIV/AIDS. From governmental to voluntary and NGO initiatives, it is very interesting to examine this aspect of the intervention. The world has seen intensive debates and policy initiatives at the United Nations organizations level. The response of the governments can be explicated from the findings of the joint United Nations program on HIV/AIDS, known as UNAIDS. According to UNAIDS findings, in 2012, 61% of countries reported the existence of anti-discrimination laws that protect people living with HIV. The proportion of countries reporting the existence of HIV-related legal services increased from 45% in 2008 to 55% in 2012. Although the lack of accessibility to legal services has in turn sustained and aggravated the instances of HIV-related discrimination all over the world. In addition to the governmental initiatives at the country level, today the world is seeing a number of voluntary works, also often termed as NGOs, working in the field of eradicating and streamlining issues related to HIV/AIDS. The significance of voluntary initiatives are so massive, mainly for the fact that they flag off issues pertaining to the grassroots, which otherwise remain at the fringes of social awareness and policy discourses. In other words, voluntary organizations provide the much-needed bridge point between the governments and people. When one talks about the issues in grassroots, the plight of the people living with HIV/AIDS, particularly the poor and socially marginalized people, are disproportionately vulnerable to HIV/AIDS and its consequences. In this regard, the UN has shown enormous commitment to connect between the governments and voluntary initiatives by emphasizing on the need to synergize the fight against HIV/AIDS. For example, The UN Millennium Declaration and its goal emphasizes the interconnectedness between development goals and the need to address the cause of vulnerability to HIV/AIDS and its impacts, in which both the state and non-state forces have to come together. Now let us try to examine the HIV/AIDS related facts. NGOs are playing a critical role in advocating for governments, UN agencies in realization of a convergence between objectives and action at the grassroots. The convergence is so significant for the fact that almost 50 countries reporting data on the prevalence of intimate partner violence. Between 9 and 60% of women aged between 15 to 49 years have reported having experienced violence at the hands of an intimate partner. Another studies on the conditions of women in Uganda and South Africa claims that women who had experienced intimate partner violence were 50% more likely to have acquired HIV than women who had not experienced violence. In sub-Saharan Africa, 60% of people living with HIV are women. In Asia, 35% are women, and in Latin America, 30% are women. Mother-to-child transmission, also known as MTCT, is an issue that directly affects women and at the same time increases the spread of HIV. UNAIDS says that at the end of 2011, there were an estimated 3.3 million children under the age of 15 years living with HIV, most of whom were infected by their mothers. Unless a proper medical security is provided, majority of these children will not live to their adulthood. NGOs have taken enormous role in combating the menacing facts of HIV/AIDS. The UN General Assembly Special Session on HIV/AIDS, UNGASS, held in June 2001, resulted in the unanimous adoption by member states of the Declaration of Commitment on HIV/AIDS that set time-bound targets against which governments and UN itself may be held accountable. Women and children constitute a class of people whose dynamics of challenge are even more voluminous, for they are socially stigmatized and economically dislocated as they acquire a status of person living with HIV/AIDS. In this context, poverty begets gender inequities, often affect the capacity of women and girls to negotiate for safer sex and compound the impact of the epidemic on them. One of the primary concerns of the NGOs is to eradicate impediments to eradicating HIV/AIDS related human rights issues. Failure to protect human rights of people living with HIV/AIDS, also popularly called PLHA, has devastating consequences with potential disturbances to prevention efforts and access to treatment, care, and support. Discrimination against PLHA and affected communities naturally denies access to employment, housing, health, and other services, in turn deepening the social and gender impacts of the epidemic. In the case of children, millions of children in developing countries are without adequate care and support, which generates extraordinary pressures on families and communities to care for orphans and children made vulnerable by HIV/AIDS. The cause is simple to understand. Once the parents as caregivers become ill or even die, children are exposed to child labor and income-generating activities. Women and girls bear a large proportion of the burden of AIDS care, both in the formal care sector and informally at the community level. This often leads to girls having to leave schools, women having diminished opportunities for economic independence, and women living with HIV/AIDS struggling to meet their own as well as their families' care needs, all of which further entrenches gender inequities. One of the most serious manifestations of this inequity is gender-based violence, which can expose women to HIV infection, and fear of which can prevent them from protecting themselves against infection. Legislation often restricts the rights of women to their own or inherited property, entrenching their economic dependence on men and limiting their capacity to refuse sex or negotiate even the condom use. According to estimates, young people constitute to make up a significant proportion of new infections each year, with 38% of PLHA worldwide now under the age of 25. It is visible that children are extremely vulnerable to cycle of orphanage and loss of lives. An estimated 14 million children worldwide have lost one or both parents to AIDS. A holistic response, including care in the community, is needed to address their needs, and this in turn can reduce their vulnerability to HIV infection. Therefore, NGOs have engineered a gendered approach to HIV/AIDS while advocating for a legislative and policy environment that promotes the rights of women, girls, and children. It is very interesting to examine country-level initiatives by NGOs and voluntary organizations. There is a growing list of NGO projects for AIDS prevention and care that are providing critically needed support all over the world. These NGOs try to address continuing women's subordination in terms of social liberty and sexual choice. Let us examine the country-specific NGOs and their HIV-related initiatives. To start with, the AIDS Support Organization, also known as TASO, works in Uganda. TASO's objective has been in the field of PLHA. TASO campaigns for medical, emotional, and practical support for people with HIV/AIDS and their immediate families. In the case of India, Bombay Dose is an example because Bombay Dose focuses on eradicating gender violence and spreading of awareness about AIDS and other related problems. Its newsletter Bombay Dose, which was started to reach out to people with alternate sexuality in the city of Bombay, has been giving a good contribution in the field of HIV-related issues. Rio de Janeiro Prostitutes Association, also known as APRJ in Brazil, works in association with the local medical establishment for regular medical checkups, family planning agency to provide condoms. Project Hope Family Life Association in Swaziland also works as a grassroots initiative in collaboration with Project Hope, an international NGO for an AIDS awareness and prevention program. FLASH provides educational materials for non-literate adults, out-of-school youths, etc. Education means protection of women engaged in recreation in Thailand offers support, assistance and access to education for women workers in Patpong, the entertainment district of Bangkok. NGOs Consortium in Kenya provides regular dialogue between NGOs and AIDS Program Secretariat, a government-supported national AIDS committee. The sharing of information skills between NGOs leads to recognition for the role of NGOs played in the AIDS program. We will now talk about the role of resource mobilization in the context of NGOs. According to the estimates of the NGO HIV/AIDS Code of Practice project, which is a project initiative of many international social developmental organizations, the voluntary platforms have played a crucial role in financial mobilizations to meet the HIV-related issues. The project has led to the increase in number of HIV/AIDS related interventions through local associations and initiatives, along with the growing ability to mobilize funds. The project also estimates that the governments have increased their spending on HIV/AIDS related issues due to the growing mobilizations of voluntary coalitions. According to estimates, the spending on HIV/AIDS in low and middle income countries increased from $1 billion in 2000 to $3.9 billion in 2002 and a projected $6.1 billion in 2004. However, the project argues that the amount falls far short of the estimated $12 billion needed by 2005. The progress made in resource mobilization is, however, very encouraging. Between 5 and 6 million people in developing countries urgently need access to ARVs, also known as antiretroviral. NGOs have played a significant role in highlighting this fundamental inequity, bringing pressure to bear on governments, the UN system, and pharmaceutical companies. World Health Organization and UNAIDS have launched a global initiative called 3x5, which aims to provide ARV therapy to 3 million people with HIV/AIDS in developing countries by the end of 2005. Towards the conclusion, we can refer to what area experts have been pointing out. Area experts have defined the term non-governmental organizations as organizations that work together outside of government. According to the World Bank, NGOs are private organizations that pursue activities to relieve suffering, promote the interests of the poor, protect the environment, or undertake community development. To sum up, one can say that NGOs have intervened on varieties of issues relating to gender inequities and the rights of the children with HIV/AIDS. NGOs have fought against oppressive traditions that sustain unequal power relations in order to ensure women and girls to exercise their choices and freedom. NGOs have worked towards fuller implementation of official schemes and benefits, etc. Therefore, NGOs will require increasing their intervention, while at the same time not forgetting to make NGOs' practices more transparent and participatory.